Okay, why don't we get started? On behalf of the Raytheon Antiwar Campaign and Massachusetts Peace Action, I want to welcome everyone to this webinar that I think you'll find well worth your time and energy. Lots of things were happening at the end of the year around Yemen, and some of those things have been confusing. There's been there was for a period of time a truce in Yemen last year. The truce has ended. There's all kinds of efforts around a Yemen War Powers Resolution to try to end U.S. collaboration with the Saudi war in Yemen. And then there's all kinds of things happening in Yemen itself. So we're hoping this webinar will help us all kind of catch up on things, get a good orientation so that we can move into the future and do effective work. We're very lucky tonight to have Dr. Aisha Jumaan from the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation with us, and also Hassan El-Tayyab from Friends Committee on National Legislation, which has doing such a tremendous amount of work on Yemen for us. I'm going to briefly introduce Dr. Jumaan and have her start the program, and then after that we'll introduce Hassan to us. So Dr. Aisha Jumaan has over 30 years of experience in public health, including viral vaccine preventable diseases, cervical and breast cancer research, surveillance, maternal child health and nutrition, primary health care, and women in development. Over those 30 years or more now, Dr. Jumaan has worked with the CDC, with the Peace Corps, and several United Nations agencies. She also previously served as an assistant professor at the Rollins School of Public Health in the epidemiology department at Emory University. Dr. Jumaan also worked in her native land, Yemen, with several UN agencies. She was an assistant professor on the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at Sana'a University, and consulted on research projects for various ministries, USAID, Save the Children, and the Dutch Embassy. So she is president of the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, which aims to increase awareness in the US public and policymakers about the humanitarian crisis underway in Yemen, and to support relief and reconstruction efforts and facilitate campaigns to bring peace to her country, to her native country. Aisha, welcome, and we look forward to what you have to tell us tonight.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for everybody who's on the call today. When I started my advocacy work in Yemen in 2015, I felt extremely lonely because there was nobody else at that time that I knew who was doing the work that I was interested in doing. So 8 years, almost 8 years now, and it's just such a pleasure to see so many people who are on this work and also continuing despite all the setbacks we've had. But we've also had a lot of positive impact. So I'm going to be talking about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, and today I'm going to focus on the economic warfare that's been, that Yemeni people have been subjected to. And the reason for that, that I'm focusing today on that, is because the truce conditions or the negotiation for truce are all about the economic warfare on Yemen. So I always like to start my presentation with this view of Sana'a. This is the place where I grew up. Sana'a is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. And I also just want to show you how beautiful Yemen is. According to the UN reports, there's the widespread conflict in Yemen, there's severe economic decline, food insecurity, and collapse of essential services in Yemen that has a tremendous toll on the population. According also to UN report, the Yemen war has killed about 377,000 people by 2022, and that more than 11,000 Yemeni children have been killed or injured as a direct result of the war in Yemen. We're not counting kids who died of malnutrition. By 2018, 85,000 Yemeni children died of hunger. So going back to Yemen's most pressing problem, I would say it's not the bombing, especially in this last year, but it's the war. It's the economy. So this is a report that says the torture in slow motion, the economic blockade of Yemen and its grave humanitarian consequences. It basically says the naval blockade imposed on Yemen by Saudi-led coalition has sustainably contributed to pushing Yemen civilians into starvation, and they can be considered tortured. And that is exactly what's happening. A lot of the people in Yemen die in their homes, die a silent death due to hunger and disease. The blockade on Yemen has had a huge impact on, and the economic warfare, on the inability of people to find food or medicine for those who are sick. So if we look at the impact of the economic war on Yemen, in 2015 alone, which is the first year of the war, the economic output fell by 28%. The price of basic goods skyrocketed. Wages were unpaid since August 2016, especially for those in the north of Yemen, where 80% of the population is, due to the fact that the central bank of Yemen was moved out of the capital, Sana'a. Fuel and cooking gas prices soared amid shortages, and purchasing power of civilians became non-existent. So the Saudi-led blockade is the primary reason for a large number of the suffering in Yemen, including starvation and spread of multiple diseases. This is from the UNVM, which it looks at what gets into Yemen. And these are the clear container discharge in Hodeidah since May 2016. Hodeidah is the major port in Yemen that used to receive 90% of what Yemen needs. And this is the analysis up to December of last year. And you can see there is a sharp drop in containers from 2016, where 40,000 containers used to get into Hodeidah, to 1,634 in 2021. And similarly would be in 2022. Data for that has not come out. If we look at the United Nations, the same verification system, and we look at the food and fuel imports into Yemen. So the large bars are food, and the red bars are fuel. Yemen needs about 500,000 tons of food and about 400,000 tons of fuel. We see the food fluctuates over a year. This is in December, in 2021, and we see very little fuel allowed in Yemen. And there were years where there was very little that came in, almost zero. In terms of cargo, which is in the yellow here, there was very little, most of the time, zero cargo. And when we talk about cargo, we're talking about medicine, we're talking about medical supplies, we're talking about everything that are essential to the services or to the population. Compare that to 2022 now, and this is, again, food was coming at about 300 to 400,000. And as I said, Yemen needs about 500,000 metric tons of food per month. And look at the fuel, we're still at 2%, just really very little, until April of 2022, when the first truce in Yemen occurred. And we see an increase in oil coming into Yemen, but that is still about 40% of the fuel and gas that Yemen needs. And by the way, all the fuel and gas that gets into Yemen comes from the United Arab Emirates, which is one of the countries that are in the coalition that's waging war on Yemen. I wanted to show again that mostly it's only fuel and food that gets into Yemen, but zero other goods. And zero other goods, that means medicine, that means anything that, like for example, if a hospital needs to repair equipment, they're not able to get spare parts for that. All commercial imports are zero. So all of that has contributed to a collapse of the economy and the inability of people to survive and become extremely food insecure in Yemen, and a large death among those who are sick because they're not able to get the medications that they need, especially chronic diseases. This is from the Norwegian Refugee Council, and they are talking about Sana'a Airport specifically, and they're saying 5 reasons why Yemen Sana'a Airport must reopen. So on August 9, 2016, the Saudi-led coalition closed Yemen main airport. Overnight, millions of Yemeni were trapped in a war zone with humanitarian and commercial goods blocked from entering through the airport. So one, it will save thousands of lives and prevent premature death. And the airport, by the way, was still closed until April of last year. 2, Yemeni will have more freedom to move around. It will be quicker, easier, and cheaper to bring goods and aid into the country. It will be good for the economy. It can build confidence in the peace process. Then I'm moving on to the blockade. A CNN report, an investigation finds the US-backed Saudi blockade is leading to deadly fuel and food shortages in Yemen, where hospitals are full of starving children. When this report came out last year, the US government actually contested the report and said there was no blockade on Yemen. So basically what the US government said at that point in time was there was no blockade on Yemen and the Houthis were to blame for the fuel shortages. Basically, the Biden administration said there isn't a blockade in Yemen. And that was really, it was extremely troubling and extremely angering to someone like me, because someone who is working in relief and trying to get medicine for children who have leukemia in Yemen for the last 3 years and unable to get it in. And then you have the US administration saying there is no blockade in Yemen. That was extremely frustrating. However, because of the CN report and because of work of activists like you, it actually worked, because under pressure over Yemen blockade, Riyadh seeks US help with defense. So because of all the pressure that was built on the US administration by all of you and people like you, then they at least now admitted that there is a blockade on Yemen, and they were starting at least to ease the entry of food at that point in time. The truce negotiation. So I want to talk about the truce negotiation and what are the terms that they are talking about. The terms of the 2-month truce that started in April 2022, and this is from the UN Special Envoy to Yemen. There were 3 main things. The first 2 were facilitating the entry of 18 fuel ships into the port of Hodeidah. Imagine, that's what we are negotiating for. Something that is a human right, and everybody in Yemen should have fuel available to them. And the second one is allowing 2 commercial flights a week to and from Sana'a Airport. Unfortunately, only 1 flight was allowed per week. However, that was extended in further truces. So after the truce in April, there were 2 extensions of those conditions, which is facilitating entry of fuel and allowing flights out of Sana'a Airport, and to only 1 destination, from Sana'a to Jordan. So my brother, who traveled last week from Sana'a he wanted to go to Oman, it would have been an hour or 2-hour flights. He had to fly to Jordan because that's the only way he can. And then from Jordan, he had to fly to Dubai and Dubai to Oman. So that took him over 20 hours instead of the 2 hours that would have been normal. And since then, as I said, there were 2 more extensions until October 2nd, when the Houthis in Yemen said, we're not going to have any more extensions with these 2 conditions only, which is the condition of, allowing 40% of Yemen fuel needs to come in, and, a few flights, 2 flights or 3 flights a week to Jordan only. So, however, we've been hearing, this is from January 17, that the Saudis and the Yemeni, especially the Houthis, have actually met in Sana'a, and they, through this back channel, they are talking to maintain the truce. So what are the new conditions that the US government has said that the Houthis' demands are maximalist? The Houthi, and this is from the Reuters article, the Houthi demands are the following: for an extension of the truce. This has been going on since October 2022, and the US government has not been supporting these demands. One is the coalition pays salaries of all state employees, including the military, from Yemen's oil and gas revenues, based on employees list of 2014. What does this mean? So Yemen used to export oil and gas, but all the money would go to the internationally recognized government, to Saudi banks, and actually to Saudi private banks. So the Yemeni population wasn't getting any of that revenues. What does it mean? Based on list, since 2014, the Houthis got into Sana'a in September 2014. So what they're saying is, we want people to be paid before we entered Sana'a. So these are the people, the civilian and the military personnel who served Yemen before the Houthi took control of Sana'a. And that is what they're negotiating. The second one they're negotiating is opening all airports and ports under Houthi control. So I'm not sure why the US thinks these are maximalist conditions, including some in the UN thinks these are maximalist conditions. Again, these are rights for the Yemeni people, and they should not have been taken out. And the Yemeni people should not have been held hostages to these demands for such a long time. So the US role in the war on Yemen, as you may have heard, the White House pushes to derail Sanders' measures, cutting Saudi support. There was a Yemen War Powers Resolution that was introduced. Hassan would talk more about that. And then this article that just came out today that I thought was quite interesting talks about US hypocrisy on foreign policy, undermines the rule-based order it claims to defend. So when we talk about the war in Ukraine, why the majority of countries of the world other than NATO are refusing to support the US and NATO position. So it basically talks in December. So if you compare the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it's very similar to the Saudi invasion and bombing of Yemen. The article says in December, the White House successfully killed an effort to end US support for the Saudi Arabia brutal war in Yemen, where the US, UK, and France have backed. The war has killed, as I said earlier, over almost 400,000 people, with 11,000 Yemeni children. The Saudi-led bombing targeted hospital, residential building, communication tower, bridges, food production, and water and sanitation infrastructure with US support. These are very similar to what the Russians are doing in Ukraine. The blockade cut off essential goods, including food, fuel, and medicine. The bombing and blockade have resulted in disease and hunger, with millions of children and pregnant women suffering from malnutrition. US is very complacent in the Saudi-led war on Yemen. US has been providing maintenance, spare parts, and weapons to Saudi-led coalition. Prior to 2018, also US was providing refueling and intelligence and logistical support. US is directly complacent in the war crimes. Experts have said that without US support, the Saudi-led war couldn't keep going. Thus, the US is prolonging the war in Yemen. And the ask that we have of everyone who is working with us is that we need to support the Yemen War Powers Resolution. And I know that Sanders had pulled out the introduction of the resolution. However, just the introduction had forced the US government to talk to the Saudis to extend the truce in Yemen and to agree to what they used to be calling maximal demand, which is paying salaries for civil servants in Yemen and the military who have not been paid since 2016, and opening and lifting the blockade, basically. So thank you very much for listening. And I'm happy to answer questions after Hassan speaks.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Aisha. I know we'll have some questions. I know I do. And we'll have time for those questions. But let's move on to Hassan, because he's got a lot of the stuff going on in Congress right now to talk about. Hassan El-Tayyab is the Friends Committee on National Legislation's Legislative Director for Middle East Policy. Prior to joining FCNL in August of 2019, Hassan was co-director of the national advocacy group Just Foreign Policy, with whom we work very closely on Yemen issues, where he led their lobbying work to advance a more progressive foreign policy in the Middle East and in Latin America. Hassan played a major role back during the Trump years in the successful passage of a War Powers Resolution to end U.S. military participation in the Saudi-led coalition's war and blockade in Yemen. Unfortunately, after that was passed, the Trump administration vetoed it. During the Trump years, he played a major role in servicing the entire Yemen movement with information and strategy regarding events in Congress, possibilities in Congress, laws in Congress, lobbying Congress around the Yemen issue. And that role of serving as a liaison between advocacy groups and Congress continues to grow by the year. So that now whenever there are national coalitions around Yemen meeting, Hassan always gives a briefing so we can all figure out just what's happening and what strategy we might employ with Congress. Hassan's writings and commentaries have been featured in numerous news outlets, including CNN, the BBC, World News, Politico, The Hill, Al Jazeera, the Huffington Post, The Intercept, and more. So we're very fortunate to have Hassan with us this evening to kind of help us get our minds around what's going on. What in the world happened, Hassan, with the, here was Bernie all set to introduce the Yemen War Powers Resolution, and all of a sudden it was taken off the table. What happened?
Well, thank you for that introduction, Paul. Thank you, Aisha. I just always love hearing her speak, and I always learn something when I hear her speak. I don't know if are there any Grateful Dead fans in the audience? Because what a long, strange trip it's been, I'm telling you. So what happened last year? Senator Sanders brought the Yemen War Powers Resolution to the floor of the Senate and withdrew the vote. So that means he didn't force the vote on the bill because the Biden administration gave Senator Sanders a call and said that they would be open to a compromise on Yemen policy to help spur more negotiations, lift the blockade, hopefully, and potentially have some executive action or executive order that would help move this conversation along. Senator Sanders at the time said, we're open to talking. We are going to hear them out. And if we don't work out a deal, we're going to be right back here with the Yemen War Powers Resolution and, potentially forcing a vote in the 118th Congress. So that's essentially what happened in December. I think it's worth, I will say that I, like many people here, were frustrated, were surprised, disappointed, but part of me also said, well, there are some silver linings that I think we need to take account. Aisha mentioned some of them, but I might, reiterate that We brought an incredible amount of domestic attention and international attention to the crisis in Yemen when people in DC really had, said, oh, okay, Biden's got that. We're not going to talk about that. We didn't let that get off the agenda of lawmakers in Washington, DC. And that's a testament to, tens of thousands of grassroots actions happening all around the country. Senators had to think about it. A lot of people in Congress, they're like, okay, well, if I don't have to vote on it, I'm not going to even give it a second of brain power. But because they had to vote on it, every single staffer in the Senate had to write up a memo to their boss saying, you're about to vote on this. This is the pros, here are the cons. FCNL with other grassroots organizations. We did a full-on briefing for Capitol Hill the week that bill was coming to the floor. And we had about, 30 or 40 Senate staffers come ask us questions, including some of our favorites like Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton. I had to address a lot of those questions, which was very fun. We got public support from Senator Murphy, Senator Lee, Senator Paul. They were quiet before this, and then they all of a sudden came out and supported. They had been long champs on the issue, but for whatever reason, they weren't out front on the WPR. But when push came to shove, they came out, and Senator Murphy actually gave a brilliant floor speech in support of the bill that I urge everyone to take a listen to. And we pushed the administration to make a commitment to policy changes and working with Senator Sanders and forced them to think about this. We also centered the blockade when folks had completely ignored what was going on. Just to reiterate some of the numbers, 130 plus bipartisan co-sponsors in the House and Senate, 100 plus national advocacy groups, literally 100,000 actions on Yemen in just a couple weeks surrounding that vote. Many of probably by the people on this call, but 100,000 plus actions all across the country. This movement that Aisha was talking about, it was kind of a lonely place, early on, and we have built incredible power that I think the peace movement, we gave a little jolt in the arm to the peace movement, and that's fantastic. And we're just going to keep growing. People, once they hear about the crisis in Yemen, they want to take action. And that's what we learned. We also saw, this is just a shout out to my FCNL crew. I don't know the numbers for all the grassroots lobbying that went around the country, but I know the FCNL network alone did almost 400 lobby visits, constituent lobby visits. So we're talking in Wyoming, Alaska, Maine, California, Indiana, Massachusetts, all over. So this is just really fantastic. So what was the beef, right? Who was against this bill and why? I think it's important as we do our little autopsy. FCNL means Friends Committee on National Legislation. That's the organization I work for, Sylvia. So Biden did a veto threat. And in Senate Foreign Relations, the chairman of that committee, Bob Menendez, and the chairman of SASC, Senate Armed Services Committee, they were opposed. They said, collectively, they said, no, this is not the right time. They thought it was unnecessary. It would complicate negotiations, and that this is their words, not mine, that violence had effectively stopped for a period now going on 9 months, and in no small part due to the robust diplomatic efforts by the United States. Now, that's what they said. What Aisha just said painted a little bit different of a picture, right? They're not counting the blockade as violence. They say, well, things aren't blowing up, right? So Yemen's enjoying a period of robust peace and prosperity. Well, that, I hate to break it to you, is not what's happening in Yemen. You're still suffering through a massive humanitarian crisis because Saudi Arabia, they've cut off, okay, there's been some progress. I'll give credit where credit is due. But we went from 5% of fuel needs to about 40%. That's still 60% of fuel needs not being met in the country. That's not going to be helpful for the economy. But here's the real number that's just mind-boggling. 0 container ships containing medicine and commercial goods, basically shut down the entire Yemen economy from October 2021 until now. Zero medicine getting through the ports. If that's not a blockade, I really don't know what is. So that's why we still need to keep this pressure on. We need to keep Saudi Arabia at the negotiating table. We need to highlight the blockade, and we need to pass a war powers to take off and prevent more U.S. support for Saudi airstrikes in Yemen. If there's nothing preventing right now, if these bombings were to start, the U.S. would still have a military footprint. We'd still be providing logistics, spare parts, maintenance for these warplanes that are all essential for the Saudi air fleet. Okay, here are a couple key talking points, because we heard a lot of that, dare I say, BS, and what we've been saying on the Hill that's been very effective is these three basic points. One, this is common sense legislation. It's bipartisan. It prevents the resumption of offensive airstrikes in Yemen. The Senate has repeatedly voted for this kind of legislation to end support. We're narrowly targeting a set of activities that constitute U.S. participation that has not been authorized by Congress. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution is really important. And Saudi Arabia still has the ability to defend itself with the billions in weapons we sold them. We're just talking about stopping bombing Yemen. That's all. Common sense. Number two, there is a blockade that is cutting off the flow of humanitarian aid and commercial goods into Yemen. This is still an issue. We need to keep the pressure on Saudi Arabia to lift the blockade. And so that's a huge piece. Highlight the humanitarian crisis and say that the U.S. should do everything it can to lift the blockade. The Houthis are doing some bad stuff too. I'm not going to lie. But we're not giving the Houthis $60 billion of weapons. That's what we're doing with the Saudis. So we have to end our complicity before we can start pointing fingers and blaming everybody else. I think this is really important. And lastly, this was actually probably the most salient for members like Senator Blumenthal and others, but Saudi Arabia openly aligns with Russia, killed a U.S. journalist, and still enjoys blank check U.S. support. Saudi Arabia, they decided to manipulate global energy markets. It was a politically motivated hostile action that raised fuel prices, empowered Russia in its immoral and illegal invasion of Ukraine. We can have different thoughts about the war in Ukraine, but this is a very effective talking point for Congress and the Hill right now. It's just the latest demonstration also of what Saudi Arabia has done to hurt the United States, our allies, and the American people. They butchered Jamal Khashoggi. They have led to a war that has led to 400,000 deaths. And Biden was correct in calling for a reevaluation of the U.S.-Saudi relationship not just a few months ago. They say we're going to veto that bill, but just in October they said they wanted a full reevaluation of the U.S.-Saudi relationship. Go figure. And that we thought the War Powers Resolution is a chance to do exactly that. So where do things stand now? Again, Bernie is in direct talks with the National Security Council. They're talking about, what should the policy change be? They may reach a decision. I don't know yet. I'm not going to hold my breath, but they are in talks and they may reach a decision about limiting logistical support, spare parts, maintenance, all that good stuff. They might come up with a deal on the blockade. I'm not in that room, but that conversation's ongoing. What we're trying to make clear to them is that our red lines are we have to end logistical support, spare parts, maintenance for any future bombings. We cannot be involved in any way. We're also saying that there can't be any weird carve out that say, well, we can do airstrikes in Yemen as long as it's defensive, whatever that means. So we're trying to say no strikes in Yemen at all. That's our red line. That's FCNL's red line. I hope you all are with me. What's next? We need grassroots pressure now more than ever. We need people around the country to tell their lawmakers. We've got about 80 new members in the House, Republicans and Democrats. They need to hear from all of us. We've got new senators. We got Fetterman. We got Senator Welch. I just met Senator Welch from Vermont. I just found out that his foreign affairs, LA, is Faith Hill's daughter. But anyway, that's a side note. I just met with her yesterday. I was like, your dad and mom are kind of cool, Tim McGraw. And anyway, that's beside the point. But we need all of them to support reintroduction of this bill and get them on early as original co-sponsors. Lock in this text. We need Senator Murphy. We need Mike Lee. We need Rand Paul. We need everybody and their uncle. Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, George Santos. I don't care, whoever the heck you are, just jump on the bill. We're good. If he can do that, maybe we'll give him a couple brownie points, but not too many. So that's what I'm hoping for. We're going to try the compromise, but I think we need to be actively moving forward towards introduction of a new Yemen War Powers Resolution, and look forward to working with you all on it and looking forward to your questions.
Well, thanks for that terrific information, Hassan. And just one further point on that. On March 1st, there's going to be a national mobilization at offices of all kinds of members of Congress, insisting that they support a War Powers Resolution. That event will be moved up if Saudi Arabia should start the bombing before March 1st. But that's where it's set right now. Hopefully this will be a nationally coordinated event and everyone will take part in it. I think Brian is putting into the chat a link to a statement that we're asking you to get your groups to sign on to, saying that they would support this action on March 1st. And so it's very important to let the Yemen movement show its strength once again on that date. So if you belong to an organization, please follow that link. It's when you have time sometime, and get your organization to sign on. I think there's about 40 or 50 organizations signed on right now. They're trying to get local organizations as well as state organizations as well as national organizations to sign on. And then Aisha, Brian, can you put the link to Aisha's Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation is also in the chat there somewhere. We'll be sending this information out to you tomorrow or the day after as a follow-up to the webinar. So you'll have a chance to look at it again. So thanks both of you for those presentations. I hope there's a lot of questions out there. I know I have some, and maybe we could start with Laura Gibney. Can we unmute Laura, Brian?
Yeah. So I was just wondering what either of the speakers think at this stage in the game, and having had this somewhat peaceful last few months, what do you think the Saudis really expect to achieve with the continued blockade? Like, what's the end game there? What do they think they're going to achieve by continuing that?
So I think I'll start first, and then I'll have Hassan add to it. When they started the blockade, it started with day one of the war, but the Sana'a airport and the Hodeidah port, that was started in 2016. The idea was if they punish the whole population, that they will be an uprising against the Houthis in Yemen. And that just really did the opposite effect, because a large portion of the population viewed the Houthi as the enemy, because now they're punishing everybody else. And many more people signed with the Houthis and went and fought with them. So, and the continuing right now is really more of a punishing tactic, because they feel they have failed militarily. And by continuing this, you're continuing to punish the people who, thought you would be defeating Mohammed bin Salman when he started this war, and Mohammed bin Zayed. They thought it's a 2-month thing. I actually heard them on TV saying it's a maximum of 2-month thing, will be over. And now we're 8 years, and they actually have lost the war. The Brookings Institute have written quite extensively on this. And it's just a way to punish the people who did not who resisted their war on Yemen.
Yeah, no additional comment, Aisha. That's perfect.
Would it be okay if I just asked realistically, Hassan, do you think, given the cozying up to Saudi Arabia now and wanting them to wean them off of any future relations with China with respect to money, do you realistically think that Biden's going to do something that would really displease them? Sorry, I'll end there.
Thank you. So the way the National Security Council, everyone has different priorities, right? National Security Council, Yemen is a third or fourth priority. Stopping Saudi Arabia from, partnering with China and Russia. They're definitely hedging between the US, China, and Russia and playing us all, really. Now, Biden has made his choice really clear that he's, going to pretty much, give some harsh words, to Saudi Arabia when he needs to, but they're not going to fundamentally change the policy. That's why our hope is in Congress right now, forcing this vote, forcing this debate, and that's really our best lever, is working with members of Congress and trying to keep this issue going, because right now I don't think the administration without this congressional pressure is going to move, but we have seen them move with the congressional pressure, and we just need to keep that going here in the 118th.
Can I add to that as well? Basically, the Saudis know that they can manipulate the White House because of all the reasons that you had talked about, Laura, but they cannot manipulate Congress and the Senate. So anytime there is an introduction of a bill that that talks about Yemen, the Saudis show a lot of flexibility in negotiation, and they are more willing to do something that they were previously not able to do or not willing to do. So by keeping the pressure, especially in Congress, the Saudis do not want to be told what to do. And if they feel that they are going to be able to be forced to do something that they don't want to do, they would rather do it on their own beforehand. So the fact that they are negotiating, actually a Saudi newspaper today published that they have reached a preliminary agreement with the Houthis on the two conditions, which is paying the salaries and not opening all the ports and the Sana'a airport, but allowing more flights out of Sana'a airport to a few more destinations. So this would not have happened had not the War Powers Resolution been introduced by Sanders and in Congress. So that's why our work is extremely important. It's the driving force, not driving just the administration to tell the Saudis we're under pressure by our constituents, but also for the Saudis to realize that it's better for them to take the initiative than to be forced to do something.
Okay, well, thank you for that analysis, Aisha and Hassan. That's great. A lot more can be said there too, but let's move on. I think I forgot to tell people how you can ask a question. If you go down to the bottom of your screen and go to reactions, you can go to reactions and hit your raise hand sign. That way we'll see you out there, and we'll eventually move down to different people who have raised their hand. So the first person raising their hand right now is on telephone, area code 510. Could you identify yourself and ask your question?
Dirk Nyhart from Berkeley meeting, and my question is, how much potable water is there in Yemen? Is there is tap water in the homes? Can you drink that? Thanks.
So before the Saudi-led bombing, most of the Yemeni cities had potable water, and it was something that you can drink from tap. However, they actually targeted all the water structures in Yemen. And even, the water system and the sanitation needed spare parts to fix them, and they weren't allowed to bring those in. So that led to the largest cholera outbreak in recorded history, with over 2 million suspected cases. and a lot of diseases that are waterborne diseases. So currently, water is not readily available, even in the capital, Sana'a.
Okay, thanks. Brian, are you seeing any questions in the chat? I have a question about the blockade myself.
Can I just add to what Aisha just said quickly?
Of course. Sure, go ahead, Hassan.
What Aisha just said is absolutely heartbreaking. And sometimes we just, we're in this policy landscape, we're just thinking about this, you hear people and say, well, the Saudis for a few months, they haven't launched any airstrikes, and now it's the Houthis' turn to be better behaved. What the Saudis have done has set Yemen back for generations, set the children of Yemen back for generations, stunted their growth, prevented them from getting education. We've got a generation of kids that will not really be able to achieve what they should have been able to achieve. And they'll never get that childhood back. And so the absurd idea that, that the Saudis are now in some way, good faith actors and the Houthis are totally responsible. I'm not giving a pass to any war crimes by any parties, but there is such, tremendous suffering as a result of the actions that Saudi has done, even in the first few months of this war. And that's why it's so important that we cut off all US funding, military support, weapon sales, from this conflict. We don't have to follow the day-to-day. Some people in DC might say, well, the Houthis just did this, drone thing, and now we have to, fundamentally change course. No, we are in the right here. This is a moral campaign. And every time, people bring this up, you have to, educate them, let them know just the full destruction that has been wreaked on Yemen, and that people, even though the bombs aren't falling, the agriculture infrastructure is still destroyed. The water infrastructure is still destroyed. The hospitals have been blown up. The bridges from north to south have been blown up. And so I don't want to hear any of that, and that's why I just think it's so important that we get this bill over the finish line.
I do a personal experience. I was in Yemen in October of last year, actually. And as I told you in my presentation, I was trying to get donated leukemia medicine to Yemeni children. Leukemia affects mainly Yemeni kids. That was donated by Novartis, which is, the best company that makes the drug. It's a $15 million donation. Have not been able to get it to Yemen. And in October of last year, when I was in Yemen, 20 Yemeni children with leukemia died because they were giving leukemia medicine that was smuggled into Yemen from India, and it was contaminated. I just lost it. When here are 20 Yemeni kids who are suffering from leukemia and have been trying to get leukemia medicine in Yemen for 3 years. 20 lost their lives because they got contaminated, smuggled medicine in. By the way, everything is smuggled into Yemen. And guess where it's smuggled from? Saudi Arabia, because we have borders with Saudi Arabia. But then they're not allowing the medicine to come in, the correct medicine. So the suffering is on a daily basis for the average Yemeni.
Okay, thank you for that, Aisha and Hassan. Why don't we go to Susie Garrett? All set, Susie.
Okay. I'm thinking, listening to your whole presentation, that's so moving. I'm so sad by it all. And I'm reminded of the United States putting the embargo on Cuba years ago, and how people resorted to bicycles, they resorted to all the doctors learning herbal medicine. And I'm wondering if that's something, a little piece of the answer here, that traditional medicines would be something to move toward. And I know for myself personally, that's like some way that I really subscribe to, because our bodies know what to do with herbs. And I'm just wondering what you might share about that. I know that the water structures, everything's been blown up. That's like ridiculous, but I'm wondering how we begin little by little to get back on the horse, so to speak, you know?
You're absolutely right, Susie. Because of the blockade, Yemeni went back to agriculture. So they have more production of food than they did in the past, because people realized they need to start planting their own food. Because Yemen uses well water, and they could not get, Yemenis used to get a lot of solar panels in. And when the Saudi realized that, they made solar panels items that can't get into Yemen anymore. So people started building their own solar panels locally. And so all the wells in Yemen are actually operated on solar panels. Sana'a probably is now the greenest city in the world, because 80% of the homes in Sana'a are on solar panels. So yes, and the cars in Yemen run actually on both gas and oil. So they modified their cars so they can be on both. So when there is a gas shortage, they're on oil. When there is an oil shortage. So yes, people are very resilient. They are very resourceful, and they are finding ways to overcome. If you look at all the medical equipments, they have not been maintained or repaired since 2015. They make their own spare parts now, but not everything is repairable that way. Yeah. They do what they can, but not everything works. But yes, they are extremely resourceful.
In herbal medicine as well? Is that
and herbal medicine, people are getting, Yemen has been always very, people do believe in herbal medicine. They use herbal medicine. And so that you have a whole market in the old city of Sana'a, the one I showed you a picture of, where you go and, you say, and I have a kidney problem, and people will prescribe something for you. So that's there. But for some chronic diseases, especially cancer, this is not something that herbal medicine had dealt with in the past.
Right.
Because people died before they even were diagnosed with cancer. And so that's something that I'm not sure that they have anything for it.
And just keep in mind too that in addition to the war and the economic devastation that it's caused, that has taken place in the middle of several pandemics that have just spread throughout the population, and that's where the embargo the blockade really hurt so much in terms of not being able to effectively deal with those pandemics. Let's take a question from Chris Hansen.
Could you tell me, Hassan, whether Sanders has reintroduced a resolution for the new Congress? And if so, what number? And how do we get the folks to sign on? How do we talk to them about that? And also, is there something in this resolution, this new resolution that he's promised, or is there some other way to address the blockade directly, which seems to be kind of being ignored by the White House, and that's what we need to get people to focus on.
Okay, Chris, very good questions. So one, the bill has not been introduced yet. It's my understanding that the bill will be introduced sometime in February. So we don't have a bill number yet, but I'm going to share a link right here. There might be other links out there, but this is one you can use. This is an email action that FCNL just put up. It has, you can send an email right to your rep and your two senators. Unless you live in Washington, D.C., then you can just send it to your rep. And it will ask them to introduce and support introduction of a new Yemen War Powers Resolution. So that's a really quick way that you can get your voice heard. And we need to, make sure Senator Warren, Senator Markey gets on that bill. McGovern, Catherine Clark, Keating was a sponsor. We need to get him on there. We need everybody that was on the bill before to jump back on. As far as the blockade, now this is a really good question that I'm glad you asked. We think that by removing U.S. support for Saudi airstrikes, essentially they're going to have a hard time launching airstrikes on Yemen if we pass this bill, that they will naturally move to try to get to end negotiations to resolve the political conflict and resolve the war and basically negotiate an end to this crisis, and which will have to include lifting the blockade. So we think this is a very important piece of leverage that if we pass, they're not going to be able to go status quo. They're going to have to negotiate an end to the war. And that's the theory of change. We can continue to get people to speak out about the blockade. I'm in the process right now. We just had a meeting with Senator Warren's office about doing potentially another letter highlighting some of the statistics that Aisha shared with us, that 0 container ships containing medicine or commercial goods got in. So we need members of Congress to keep speaking out about that. But I do think that if we can, stop Saudi airstrikes, which are part of the enforcement of the blockade. I mean, let's be real. People aren't flying planes into Yemen because they're afraid that Saudi Arabia is going to shoot those planes down, and they're afraid to dock in Hodeidah port because they're afraid that Saudi warplanes are going to do airstrikes on those vessels, including the Saudi Navy too. But I hope that logic makes sense and why we think the war powers is so strategic right now.
Okay, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Hassan. We welcome Kevin Martin from Peace Action. Kevin, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks to Mass Peace Action, thanks to Aisha and Hassan. So one of the things that I want to put some more thought into, and possibly with the coalition of groups working on the issue, including Action Corps and others, is more direct pressure on Biden and the administration itself. Right now, of course, we support the War Powers Resolution, but we don't have the votes in the Senate. And that's why Bernie had to withdraw. And I think Bernie did a good thing. And he played a sort of weak to middling hand pretty well, because Biden could have been hardball and say, sorry, Bernie, you ain't got the votes. Goodbye. They didn't have to, agree to negotiate with Bernie. And I'm trying to think, does Biden have some reputation as a kindly old grandfather or something that needs to be pierced because of the suffering of Yemeni children? And that could be bird dogging. Now, Biden doesn't get out and travel as much as Obama did, for example, but possibly bird dogging Biden's appearances and or media and social media. Now, it's tough because, Yemen is just not an issue that a whole heck of a lot of people know a lot about, despite great work by FCNL, Action Corps, Peace Action, and others. It's not a high profile issue, unfortunately. But I'm just trying to think, I don't think we can let Biden himself off the hook for, his responsibility for US foreign policy. And Trump took a fair amount of criticism for basically subcontracting US foreign policy in the region to Israel and Saudi Arabia. Well, Biden's doing about the same, maybe to a slightly less degree, but not a whole lot. So this could be messaging, could be media, could be social media, or could be in-person bird dogging. I think Biden himself, we have to raise the accountability and the cost to him and his reputation. The other thing about that is I fully expect he won't run for re-election. Now, what does that do? Does that make him more or less likely to be able to do the right thing on foreign policy? I can't say exactly, but I'm going to put some more thought into this. I also think we need to do that on nuclear disarmament issues, on Ukraine, and some other places as well. So that's not to de-emphasize the congressional strategy and the war powers strategy, but I do think more pressure directly on Biden, and he has to take a hit to his reputation for that.
If I may respond, Kevin, there's a lot of that I totally agree with as far as directly, talking to Biden, getting some more mainstream, articles, interviews, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, really trying to make this, a thing, getting, people to go on Tucker Carlson and start talking about Yemen. That would be my dream. As far as the votes, though, I want to throw this out there. I had heard from Republican groups that have been lobbying that we had 8 Republican votes. It's actually more votes than we had in 2019, which we had 7 there. So they said we had about 8. I heard that Senator Cardin was going to vote yes. We heard about some defections with Padilla and Feinstein, but I think this time it will be a little bit different. I think that the Sanders office, I've spoken with their staff. I think they're going to do a better job, doing that advanced outreach, trying to work out, is there some compromise that can be struck between the administration, between SFRC and SASC that kind of get this over the finish line. Maybe it means, right now we really want logistics, spare parts, maintenance. The original bill, SJ Res 56, also talked about intelligence. Intelligence sharing was the thing that people were really concerned about. At least that's what they told me at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So maybe there's a compromise there if we narrow the scope slightly, but still do enough where it can stop the Saudi airstrikes. The spare parts and maintenance is exactly what's keeping the warplanes in the air. And it seemed like the Menendez folks were a bit more open to that. And so that's what I'm hoping, is that we can get to 51. And again, we only need 51 to be able to pass this bill. So we were it was closer than I think that it was being reported. Sanders, I don't think he had the votes with that original, that text last year. I think it was going to be close and competitive, but maybe with a compromise, we could actually get over the finish line. And that's my goal in the next couple weeks here, is to see if I can bring all these folks together with the Sanders team to see if we can get to 51. But completely agree with you that more pressure directly on the administration, on Biden, is really, smart thinking and something that I would totally support and want to help Kevin, you and Peace Action with.
Well, and partly what Bernie did in revving up that vote and then, withdrawing it, is he got the issue unstuck. And there were several senators, including, if you look at especially Murphy and Lee, had been champions in the past. But as far as I know, they'd been mum, and there just been a lot of senators sitting on their hands, not declaring anything. As you said, Hassan, if there's not a vote upcoming. Now, I don't quite understand, because I was part of some people that persisted on Lee, and I know you were too, and why Lee was mum for so long, and Murphy as well, but they're not anymore, and also Paul and others. So that was a great thing that Bernie did by getting it unstuck, unstagnant, and some senators did have to declare.
Okay, we're moving a little late, but I'd like to have, I'm coming from a little different point of view. I'm very disappointed that Bernie did not call the vote, that I think it did have a chance of winning based on the feedback we were getting through various sources. But even if it lost, it would have created an incredible stink to have a 50-50 vote on a War Powers Resolution, and I think it would have had a tremendous impact on Biden himself to see that. But Brian has a little bit different take on it. I wonder, Brian, whether you'd give your thoughts about the impact of not having that vote.
Well, I think I'm somewhere in the middle. And I do think that even a congressional strategy, especially using this resolution, which is privileged, at least in the Senate, and is really a special piece of legislation that was devised back in the 70s, as we all know, as a result of Nixon's illegal bombing of Cambodia. It was designed to put direct pressure on a president of the United States, because I think Kevin's absolutely right when he says it's hard to lobby and bird dog a president in the same way that you might a member of Congress, right? They have 320 million constituents. And so each constituent voice is a little quieter when you're talking about the president. But the War Powers Resolution and even the threat of it really threatens to throw light on Mr. Biden's position and the hypocrisy of his position. And I think that that's had an effect. And I think one good thing that the administration has done, and I think that this is probably behind the scenes, but I think they're using all this agitation, this wonderful agitation that we've created, to say to Saudi Arabia, hey, I have this looming over me, and because of the past statements I've made, I can't be publicly embarrassed. So despite the fact that the truce ended, we have not seen the aerial bombing resume. And right, Dr. Jumaan is right to say that the blockade is causing most of the devastation, but that makes a huge difference. The fact that this aerial bombing has not resumed. Just think of what a difference that would make in your life, of not having to worry about a bomb dropping out of the sky onto your head every time you leave your house. That's a huge difference. And so, I was disappointed too, Paul, when that vote was called. I'm disappointed that this is not passing with every single member of the Congress saying we cannot be involved in war crimes. We cannot be involved in a genocide. It seems so simple. But we have to remember that our advocacy is having an effect. It's having a real effect. A small group of concerned citizens making noise does make a difference. And that should empower us. It should inspire us to keep making noise, because who knows what we can do.
Yeah, I actually agree with you, Brian. I also want to say that when the Saudi put the blockade on Yemen, especially on Sana'a airport, Iran decided at that point in time to fly aid into Yemen. And the Saudis threatened that they will use their air force to bomb them. So preventing bombing is actually, that will allow for any country that wants to break the blockade, they can fly into Yemen. So the threat of bombing is what's keeping Sana'a airport closed. So I think that's very important. In terms of bombing, and every time you get out of your house, actually the majority of bombs were actually residential homes in Yemen. So you were not safe anywhere. And I'll tell you personally that my parents' neighborhood were bombed every single day, the first 2 years. And I'd go to sleep not knowing that the next morning I can call my parents and have them still be alive.
Thank you, Aisha. And let's keep in mind that those bombs are made by our old friends at Raytheon here. So gives us a special responsibility to do what we can here. So I think this has been a great presentation. I think we have been encouraged to keep at it, to really see this thing through to the end until the people in Yemen have a chance to work out their problems among themselves without a foreign invader bombing their country, trying to install a government that foreign invader wants to be the government of Yemen. And so we have a lot of work to do, but I think we can do it. And I'll remind people, first of all, Hassan, if you could send Brian and myself that email that you talked about of getting people to send letters, so that we could get that out in the follow-up in a day or two to this webinar. We'll send out that information about how you can participate in that. And what we want to focus on right now is that in addition to going after Biden in whatever ways we can, to really zero in on pushing that War Powers Resolution. Just the zeroing in on it makes the Saudis worried about what might happen if they resume bombing, that it would put Biden in a position where he would have to do something and would not be able to get away with supporting the resumption of that bombing. So please, we'll send out the link to that statement that you can sign. Try to get your group to sign on to it so that when March 1st comes and we have all these actions, we're going to try to have it all the congressional offices around the country, that we have a statement signed by a lot of groups in support of that action. So please take a look at that as well. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks especially, obviously, to Hassan and Aisha for spending their evening with us and for sharing with us the tremendous amount of research and effort and thinking and strategizing that they've been going through for a number of years now. And thanks up to all of you for anything you've done on Yemen. And this is our time to see it through to the end and to end this war. So good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you so much.
Bye-bye.